I'm Stella. Welcome to my channel 30 Books, and I've got two very special guests, Astrid Edwards, thanks for your time, and Richard Fidler, who needs no introduction at all. And they're here for my salad spinner of fear.
I'm terrified.
You should be. Are you scared?
I'm feeling very nervous.
Yeah.
I'm just feeling vulnerable and tender right now.
Oh, you're in safe hands. I've done this many times before. Nobody has cried yet. Give me that question. You ready? The worst thing, what is the worst thing about being a writer?
People asking you about writing, like this right now.
Really?
Yes. Because it means that I'm not by myself, quietly cocooned in my own room.
Oh, you're one of those
I'm one of
writers.
those.
Really?
Yeah.
How quiet does things have to be for you to write?
Oh, they don't have to be quiet. I just need to be by myself.
Right, alone with your thoughts.
And my cats.
Oh. And your cat's names?
Margaret, Attwood and Joan Didion.
No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Tell me about Margaret Attwood and Joan Didion. Not the cats, but them, but the writers, like.
Margaret Attwood, I was forced to read The Handmaid's Tale in year 12, and it was, you know, that kind of book for a 17-year-old. It got me at the time, and I've never been able to forget it. And Joan Didion, well, she has MS, and I have MS, so I just kind of feel a bit of a loyalty.
When I was 17, I read The Thornbirds. That was.
Look, I also read that.
Is that a bore? Is that a good one?
No, it's fine.
Advice. What is your advice to new writers?
Don't tell yourself to wait until you get a fortnight off to go to a cabin by a lake or in the mountains somewhere. I wrote large parts of my first book on the bus on my way to work. If you're going to write it, just write it. Don't postpone it. Just put it out, back yourself. And also, and my advice to new writers is listen to advice as well. If you're being published, you're often surrounded by very good people editors will give you very good advice. That doesn't mean listen and act on absolutely everything they say, but listen to what they have to say. Because very often the advice is proffered in good faith and with some degree of expertise. That's probably...
That's great advice. Would you agree with that advice?
I would.
And one more thing, avoid cliches. I know that's an obvious thing to say, and itself is a bit of a cliche, but please, don't have things falling on stony ground. Just avoid cliches by all means, because they really just bother me when I read them on the page.
What's your favourite cliche?
Cold as snow.
Cold as snow. Cold as ice.
I don't know. I remember I was putting on a jacket. I don't know if it's a cliche, but it's an old Australian saying. I was putting on a new jacket one, and my dad said, "Look at that, son. It fits you like a bum in a bucket." It does.
That's
Is it a cliche? Or is it just Australian witticism?
Yeah, Australian witticism. Have we got time for one more?
Sure.
Go on. One more. What is this? Is writing a waste of time?
Definitively, no, it's not a waste of time.
What?
So I'm just laughing at my question here.
Oh, okay. So you I wonder why I asked that question.
You were
Is
in a
writing
bad
a
mood.
wasting of
Yeah.
time? Yeah. Do you think
Provocative.
writing's a waste of time?
Oh yes, that's why I've written 4 books. Of course, it's not a waste of time. It's a delightful thing to do. My grown-up job in radio is very collegial, and I like that very much. But writing is as Astrid says, a very solitary, pleasurably solitary process. And yes, I need to be alone, and ideally, the place has to be quiet as well. But that's the pleasure of that, in contrast to working collegially.
This one relates to you as well. Can you remember the first adult book you read?
Now, I just need you to define what you mean.
Adult.
Some smut fest, is that what you mean? Something smutty.
Wow, why not? Well, I think we're of a similar
grown-up.
vintage where we didn't actually have the crossover books. So I went from reading, Enid Blyton straight to George Eliot and, Macaulay McCulloch sort of.
You mean grown-up?
Grown-up book.
Right, forget everything I just said before. Forget everything.
Although...
Forget absolutely everything I just said.
All right.
Okay. Grown-up book, gee, that's a hard one, isn't it? First, I think it was, and this is going to sound really funny, but War and Peace.
You went straight for the hard ones.
Yeah. It was War and Peace.
What were you, like 13 or?
Yeah, and I was kind of told. I mean, the whole the mythos around War and Peace was that it's, this gigantic event in world literature, and it has that kind of celebrated status. And I imagined it would be something hard to read. And of course, it's just a page turner. You just kind of tear through it. It begins with a party, and it's completely fascinating. And so I was just carrying it around with me everywhere. Flicking pretty quickly through the battle scenes, which are a bit tedious in War and Peace, but then just tearing through it. My mum was strongly encouraging this. Both my parents are were working class country people, and big readers, the way working class country people often are in Australia. And she was big on the Russians, particularly on Tolstoy. She read War and Peace and Anna Karenina about 5 or 6 times during the course of her life. My father was a history reader, and he disapproved. She said, "Oh God, Mum would say, I'd love to have been there in a troika, wrapped in fur, going to the opera in Petersburg." And my dad said, "Pamela, that whole civilization was built on the misery of untold millions." And she goes, "Shut up, Alan, shut up, shut up. I don't care. I don't care."
I'm going to bring the tone down and say my first adult book was the uncut version of Stephen King's It.
And what sort of impact did it have on you?
I was about 12. I did not understand most of it, but I learnt a lot.
So you weren't reading Flowers in the Attic? Was that considered? Talk about that's your adult book. Did you learn anything? Do you feel like you learnt anything from reading Tolstoy at such an impressionable age?
I don't know if I learned. Well, I mean, there's the lesson at the end of War and Peace, which says that there's no such thing as great people. There's no great. He tries to disprove the great man theory of history. It's really, history is defined by the bazillions of decisions made by bazillions of people, and the form of kind of tidal waves that meet one another and all that. I don't think that's entirely true, but I think I took that on to some degree. And then I read Nietzsche at university, which sort of pushed it all the other way. And then I've sort of landed somewhere in between, as you tend to do as you turn into an old bugger like I am. Yes, yes. So that's where I ended up with that. But I think that when I came back and read it again in my 20s, the thing I got most from it was the thought that Tolstoy can do this thing where he can write about this very large series of sweeping events. He can sort of write from 30,000 feet in the air, but then he can also write really beautifully about, which I didn't understand as a kid obviously, but as an adult I did, of what it feels like to inhabit the body of a man. Like there's a moment where Vronsky is, I think he's sort of massaging a kind of a tender calf that I think he stretched during polo or something like that. And the way he talks about how it feels to inhabit a male body, it was astonishing, like to write with that kind of detail and sympathy. And then I also read Anna Karenina, which is an extraordinary novel because Tolstoy wanted to write a very didactic novel about a fallen woman, and wag his finger at her. But as Richard Flanagan says, sometimes your characters escape you when you write them, and in the end, Anna, who he created, she won him over, but he ended up writing a very, very beautifully sympathetic novel.
But then he threw her under a train.
Yeah. Well, that's the tragedy of her. She is, she's mentally ill by the end of the book. It's an amazing feat. So yes, they're the kinds of unhelpful lessons I get from reading Russian literature.
Thank you so much for your generous answer and for playing the salad spinner of fear, Richard Fidler. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Astrid Edwards, who absolutely has the best handshake in town.